It's The Real News. I'm Aaron Mate. Is the NFL caving to Donald Trump on forcing players to stand for the national anthem? Well, it sure looks that way. In a letter today, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell told owners, quote, "We believe everyone should stand for the national anthem." The issue will be discussed at an owners meeting next week. Goodell's letter just came hours after President Trump threatened the NFL's tax breaks with, what else? A Twitter message. Trump wrote, "Why is the NFL getting massive tax breaks while at the same time disrespecting our anthem, flag, and country? Change tax law." All this comes one day after ESPN host Jamel Hill was suspended for 2 weeks after criticizing comments from Dallas Cowboys owner Jerry Jones. Naturally, President Trump took aim at Hill on Twitter as well. Gerald Horne is an author, historian, and professor of history and African American studies at the University of Houston. Professor Horne, welcome. Your reaction to the last 24 hours of news, starting with now what I started with, Goodell, the commissioner, indicating that he's going to go with Trump on forcing players to stand.
Well, first of all, forcing players to stand should be an issue of collective bargaining with an NFL players union. Their contract is expiring relatively soon, and I would imagine that that will be an issue of contention that could very well lead to a strike. Second of all, with regard to ESPN and their suspension of Jamel Hill, the ESPN Sports Center host, you may know that under Connecticut law, there is a wider protection for employees' free speech rights than exists under federal law, for example. The New York Times pointed that out some weeks ago. So I would hope that Ms. Hill has adequate counsel in order to pursue this. But the wider issue is the political question. That is to say that Donald J. Trump, with his devilish insight into U.S. political culture, which, by the way, I'm afraid even surpasses the insight of some of our friends on the left, recognizes that within the Trump base, he's striking a resonant chord when he goes after relatively affluent African-American men. You may recall that during the bad old days of slavery, the U.S. slave owners tried to deport free Negroes, and their particular tactic was in a sense ratified when Denmark Vesey, a free Negro, tried to lead a massive slave revolt in Charleston, South Carolina, about 195 years ago. Recall as well, during the bad old days of lynching, that the lynchers oftentimes targeted affluent Black people because they tended to discredit the very predicate of white supremacy. So Mr. Trump is playing a very dangerous game, but thus far it's helping to inflame and energize his base, which is even more dangerous.
Right. You know, I'm reminded that it's not just Republicans who do this. I'm thinking of when back during President Clinton's run for the presidency, around his first term, when he picked a fight with the rapper Sister Souljah after she had made some comments critical of the police. So it's kind of a tradition in the U.S. For when politicians want to rile up their base, they go after prominent African Americans.
Well, you are correct. And I should also add that when it comes to trying to rile up their majority white base, that is to say, recall that George H.W. Bush did the same thing with the notorious Willie Horton ad when he tried to invoke the specter of the Black criminal and the Black rapist in order to destabilize the campaign of his challenger, Governor Michael Dukakis of Massachusetts. And recall as well the very essence of U.S. politics, which has involved many in the so-called white majority retreating and abandoning the Democratic Party after 1965, when President Lyndon Baines Johnson signed into law the Voting Rights Act, which for the first time gave a majority of Black people the right to an untrammeled right to vote. This is a reality that I'm afraid oftentimes eludes many of our friends who supposedly are with us.
If you could comment more on what ESPN's Jamel Hill has done. I mean, first, she called out President Trump for being a white supremacist, faced a huge backlash for that. Then she went after Cowboys owner Jerry Jones, as I said, because he said that anybody who disrespects the flag will not play. But I'm wondering if you can just comment on the significance of her speaking out. I mean, as a person of color, but also as a woman in a totally male-dominated field of sports broadcasting.
Well, it's very heroic on her part, and she deserves our support. Obviously, she touched a sensitive nerve when she suggested that those who objected to what Cowboys owner Jerry Jones had recommended should go after those who advertise on Cowboys football games. That's a very sensitive and explosive chord that she was striking. And keep in mind as well that if you consult the record, you'll find that Jerry Jones himself has a demonstrated record with regard to, shall we say, abuse of younger women. I would suggest that you look at the record in that regard, and you'll find incidents that I'm sure will turn your stomach. So the fact that Jamel Hill went after the Cowboys and went after Jerry Jones shows an extraordinary amount of heroism on her part.
And the NFL owners, are you surprised that they appear to be coalescing around bowing down to Trump and, as Goodell suggested today, making it mandatory to stand for the flag or for the anthem?
Well, I think that the NFL owners are doing at root a political and financial calculation. They recognize that there is a kind of equivalence between a good deal of their viewer base and their audience and a good deal of the Trump base. When Mr. Trump makes these inflammatory statements, they feel that a good deal of their audience will follow after Mr. Trump and may decide to boycott the NFL. What I hope that they're taking into account is that there are football fans, such as myself and such as millions of others, who find what Mr. Trump and Jerry Jones are doing is absolutely abhorrent. So in some ways, the NFL owners are between a rock and a hard place. Predictably, they've decided to tail after the right-wing sector of their base, but I dare say that that may be a decision they'll live to regret.
You know, in his hostility towards these black athletes who are taking a knee in protest of racism and police brutality during the anthem, I thought Trump raised an important question in his tweet today when he talked about the NFL's tax break. So if you take away the second part of his tweet in which he conditions his question on the disrespect for the flag, but the first part is simple. If you just read, why is the NFL getting massive tax breaks? That's a fair question in and of itself.
It certainly is. I mean, look at the Los Angeles Rams. Once the St. Louis Rams, they looted the state of Missouri and the city of St. Louis in order to build a stadium, and then abandoned that stadium and moved to Los Angeles, where they're now looting the city of Inglewood and the county of Los Angeles in order to build an even grander stadium. This is nothing new. This happens all the time. And I do agree with you that at a time when many of our public schools are being starved of financing, when public hospitals are crumbling all about, why are tax breaks being accorded to billionaire football owners? This is worse than insanity.
So, you know, going back to something you said earlier, that the NFL owners might come to regret siding with Trump on this. Why do you say that?
Well, I think that Jamel Hill is an intelligent woman. She recognizes that when she suggests a boycott of advertisers on Cowboys football games because of what Jerry Jones has recommended, that there are those within her own fan base that will agree with her and that will follow her recommendation and therefore will rebel against this idea that NFL owners should crack down on players who, after all, are protesting against police terror against Black people. And not only against Black people, but we already know, as I suggested a few moments ago, that oftentimes affluent Black people are disproportionately targeted by the police authorities because they seem to stir up some kind of race class antagonism that lies close to the heart of the founding of the United States of America. So I dare say that the NFL owners may live to regret this decision that they're taking, and hopefully they will live to regret it.
We'll leave it there. Gerald Horne, author, historian, professor of history and African American studies at the University of Houston. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on The Real News.